Was it just a coincidence that World War I started in Europe the very year following the Federal Reserve Act? Was it a coincidence that the U.S. national debt rose from under $3 billion in 1914 to over $27 billion, a ninefold increase by the end of the war? A similar jump occurred during World War II, from $49 billion in 1941 to $258 billion in 1945. Was it a coincidence that the man who shepherded the Federal Reserve Act through Congress was the same man who authored the Covenant of the League of Nations? Wilson's top aide and Illuminati minder throughout both terms, Colonel Edward M. House, was also the man who negotiated a secret pact with the British government ensuring U.S. participation in the European conflict before Wilson ran for re-election in 1916 and won on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Yeah, House was a busy boy. When it became apparent that the U.S. wasn't going to buy into his one world government scheme, the League of Nations, House and others formed the Institute for International Affairs with an eye toward shifting public opinion. The American branch of this Illuminati promotional agency was to be called the Council on Foreign Relations, which was begun on July 29, 1921. Its founding members included Colonel House, J.P. Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Paul Warburg, Otto Kahn, and Jacob Schiff, the same group who had pushed through and profited by the Federal Reserve System. Emerging from the 1929 stock market crash unscathed, apparently because they had engineered it, this same group was poised to put their man in the White House in 1932. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's solution to the Depression was for America to borrow huge sums of money from the very men who had caused its fall in the first place. In 1934, he put the last nail in the coffin of Jacksonian fiscal soundness by taking America off the gold standard, a move that opened the door to unrestrained expansion of the money supply. Since any problem could now be solved by borrowing money, and since the supply of money could be expanded to fit any perceived need, the bankers who controlled the Fed could now create profits at will, like turning on a faucet. Instant money, just add trouble. The fox was not merely in the henhouse, he held the mortgage on it. It is fitting, perhaps, that it was during the Depression that the Council on Foreign Relations gained control of the top echelons of government in this country. I mean, it certainly makes me depressed. Since 1934, almost every U.S. Secretary of State has belonged to the CFR. The CIA has been under the Council's thumb almost continuously from its inception. And forget what you think you know about Democrats versus Republicans, liberals versus conservatives. Virtually all presidential candidates since Roosevelt, on both sides of the political fence, have been members of the Council on Foreign Relations, dedicated to the New World Order. One notable exception, Harry Truman, was advised by an inner cadre of, quote, wise men, all 6 of whom were CFR members. The only real exception to the rule was Barry, a choice not an echo, Goldwater, whose candidacy in '64 was torpedoed by his own party's CFR-led Rockefeller wing. It almost goes without saying that the Council on Foreign Relations was instrumental in the formation of the United Nations. The central plank of their agenda is the surrender of America's sovereignty and independence to a world governing body controlled by the elite ruling class. Part of the picture is subjugation of our armed forces under the auspices of the UN. The nagging question to all of this is why? Why do a bunch of elitist bankers and power-hungry politicians want the UN to control everything? Well, they don't. Not exactly. They aren't particularly interested in world peace or stopping hunger, eradicating disease, protecting the environment, or any of 1,000 worthy causes that the UN would claim to support. But taking control of the world one nation at a time is like herding cats. Just when you've got one cornered, another one slips out of your grasp. No, world domination is far easier to achieve if you can first get everybody to surrender their sovereignty and defense to one central organization, benevolent, democratic, easily corrupted, and relatively clueless. That's why they think they want a one-world government, so they can rule the world. The real solution to this puzzle is somewhat more sinister. Remember the Illuminati's founder, Adam Weishaupt? He knew exactly what he was doing and why. His ultimate goal was to put Lucifer, Satan, the devil, in the driver's seat. In a way, he succeeded. Since the days of Albert Pike, no one could point to a single man and say, he's the leader of the Illuminati. Because of this, some say it no longer exists. But the truth is, Satan has taken the reins himself. And by now he has everybody singing out of the same hymnal, even without a choir director. So am I saying that Bill Clinton and George Bush get together with their other CFR buddies on the weekends and hold satanic rituals and maybe sacrifice a goat at the base of the Washington Monument? No, I can pretty much guarantee that 90+% of today's CFR members have no idea who they're working for. They think they're in it for the money, or the power, or in Clinton's case, the sex. I'm sure some of them even have altruistic motives. They really believe that the poor dumb sheeple of the world need gifted and enlightened shepherds like them. They are mistaken about a great many things. In their arrogance, they have become the unwitting pawns of Satan. Paul warned Christians what they were facing.
For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Ephesians 6:12.
The elite and powerful members of the Council on Foreign Relations have no idea what they're doing, who they're doing it for, or why. When I began this soapbox rant a couple of pages back, I mentioned that there were 2 Illuminati-dominated organizations operating in America that could shed light on the nature and perhaps the identity of the Whore of Babylon. The Council on Foreign Relations was pretty easy to spot. Treason in high places usually comes to light sooner or later. The other one, however, is in stealth mode, and not only because they style themselves a secret society. At first glance, it's hard to take the Freemasons seriously. To outsiders, they come off at best like a civic-minded fraternal service organization, or at worst like harmless buffoons, no more or less dangerous than Rotarians, Elks, or the Loyal Order of Moose. They seem to be all about secret handshakes, funny hats, and esoteric rituals leading towards incomprehensible grades of achievement called degrees. High-degree Masons, called Shriners, support burn wards and hospitals for crippled children, and drive their funny little cars in parades, delighting young and old. It's hard to think of them as members of the Illuminati because Freemasonry is a much older society, one which traces its lineage back thousands of years, if you believe the press. Many of America's founding fathers were Masons. Their public image is one of religious neutrality, welcoming Catholics and Protestants, Muslims and Jews, Buddhists and Mormons and Hindus and members of any religion or none at all to the fold. That is, if you're a Caucasian male. Otherwise, forget it. Though they claim roots as far back as Solomon's Temple, or even further, all the way back to the building of the Tower of Babel, it appears that Freemasonry as an organized entity was actually begun by John Dee, the self-styled sorcerer who achieved a position of power in the court of Elizabeth I of England. There is some evidence that a form of Freemasonry was practiced by the Knights Templars, the original international bankers, after they were outlawed and driven underground by the Roman Catholic Church on Friday, October 13th, 1307, a ban engineered by Philip IV of France in an effort to avoid having to repay the vast sums he had borrowed from them, an act that might be reprised in the last days. Blending the occult practices of Catholic heretics like Giordano Bruno and Pico della Mirandola with the Jewish mysticism of the Kabbalah and the black magic practiced by Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague, Dee's brand of Freemasonry was overtly satanic. But Lucifer prefers to work in the shadows. The group soon morphed into something that could be embraced, or at least tolerated, in polite society. In its present form, it was heavily influenced, some would say redefined, by our old friend and Illuminati leader Albert Pike, who was the sovereign Grand Commander of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite Masonry from 1859 until his death in 1891. His massive tome, Morals and Dogma, is supposed to be read by Masons upon reaching the 14th degree. In practice, hardly anybody reads it, and nobody understands it. But Pike's influence pervades the Scottish Rite just as much through his work in editing the rituals of the Masonic degrees. Ex-33-degree Mason Jim Shaw, in his book The Deadly Deception, tells in detail how the rituals were administered. He says, quote, I had no idea of what I would be swearing to until I was actually hearing and repeating each line. Had I been able to hear or read the oath in advance, I might not have been able to say it. Even while I was taking it as I did, one might expect that the nature of parts of it would have made me hesitate. But I really wasn't thinking about the nature of the oath. Unquote. The nature of the oath was Pike's satanic philosophy, wrapped in a cloak of feel-good, quasi-religious gibberish. Though Pike made a career out of obfuscating his nefarious agenda, he occasionally stated plainly what was on his mind, as he did on July 14, 1889, to the 23 Supreme Councils of the world. Quote, that which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God one adores without superstition. Like I said, clear as mud. To you, Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. Unquote. That was quoted by J. Edward Decker, Jr. in the Question of Freemasonry. Remember this the next time you go to a 4th of July parade in your hometown and applaud the Shriners in their fezzes and funny little cars. Those guys are all 32nd degree Masons. They have all taken blood-curdling oaths honoring Lucifer, disguised, of course, as Osiris, Allah, Shiva, Baal, or Thor, most of them without having the foggiest notion of what they were saying. Yeah, I know it sounds silly, but you've got to say this stuff if you want to be in the club. Where's the harm in it? If you tell the average Mason that he's worshiping Satan, he'll laugh in your face. Most never get beyond the 3rd degree and don't really understand what they're a part of. To them, Freemasonry is just a fraternity. Most would be shocked to read what Manly P. Hall, a 33rd degree Mason, had to say about the source of enlightenment. Quote, when the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply this energy. Unquote. To fully understand the relationship between Lucifer and Freemasonry, let's return to the quote from Pike in the previous paragraph. He goes on to say, quote, "Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai," this is the Hebrew word for Lord, supposedly descriptive of Yahweh in the Old Testament, "is also God." Now, Pike's capitalization is revealing. He uses a lowercase g in reference to Adonai, or Yahweh, but an uppercase G in reference to Lucifer.